The Buffalo Bills start Wednesday out with a blockbuster trade, sending Stefon Diggs to the Houston Texans. This week on the Wandering Buffalo podcast.
You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your host, Justin Goddard.
Bills Mafia, welcome in and thank you for joining me on this week's episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Buffalo FAMBase podcast network. My name is Justin, and I will be your host today, and just want to start this off at the top and go ahead and say that we have a bit of a change of plans this week. Anybody that listened to the show last week, the plan for this week's episode was to run through some mock drafts, play out some scenarios, see how it all goes. Had that episode fully recorded yesterday, about to release this morning. And, then I look at my phone and the Bills have traded Stefon Diggs, which rendered all of my mock drafts completely null and void, changed all of our priorities. So I'm going to go ahead and just scrap that whole episode. And we will revisit some mock drafts here. But yeah, obviously some pretty wild breaking news. News that I personally have to eat a whole bunch of crow on. I've had so many conversations with so many people about just the impossibility of Diggs being traded, just due to the financial implications, and didn't seem to matter to Brandon Beane. Kind of get into my thoughts on all of that, but this is a situation that my initial reaction to it is very different than what I kind of talk myself into. And it's really hard to fully flush out how I'm feeling about it until we get to August, September, the football games start being played, and we see how this all plays out. The initial reaction, it was just a swift kick in the nuts. Not only did we lose our number one receiver, who's been super productive, but it actually costs more to have him not on the roster this year than for him to be here. So the Bills taking on $31 million in dead cap this year. And not only that, you have to replace that number one receiver. It sucks. Stefon Diggs has been one of my favorite players over the last few years on the Bills. There's a certain degree of his social media, his Twitter, the cryptic stuff that's annoying, but wasn't super bothersome to me. But when I'm looking at this situation, I can't help but to feel like the relationship between him and the organization had soured more than we'd really seen. And I think this kind of might go back to last year with all the offseason stuff. I think maybe we saw some duct tape on it to get through the season, but those relationships never really being fully mended, and it kind of resurfacing again now. I believe it was like a $12 million dead cap hit if they had waited to do this till next year. And I think production was still there for Diggs. So kind of tells me that the relationship had gone so sideways that it wasn't going to be beneficial to wait another year here. And Brandon Beane got it done. For my kind of bigger picture view set on this, it also seems to me like Brandon Beane is very set on kind of resetting the roster, resetting the cap, and to me, for my opinion, it's kind of like Bean has decided this was his medicine year. We see that, not doing the full restructure on Josh Allen, letting some of these aging players, fan favorites, go. When you're talking about Boyer, Hyde, Trey, just a bevy of players, and now we see Stefon Diggs, and this is where I start thinking of the bigger picture of it. And do I think in the immediate short term this is kind of a step back for the team? Yes. But that kind of goes into, he's still got 4 or 5 months to build out this roster. And I think this is kind of the thing that has to be done, and Bean's doing it now, that allows him to reset to make sure we're this competitive throughout the second half of Allen's career here. And we've seen it over the past 3-4 years. It's kind of been keeping this core together, paying pieces, pushing money into the future, and the team wasn't able to get over the hump, and it came time for the Bills to be due. And this is kind of, like I said, the medicine year. Could have, doubled down and kept some of that core together again and tried to do another run, but these players were just, getting another year older. I think it was time for a reset at some positions, and I didn't think Mitch Morse was the first one that surprised me. I didn't think we were going to be resetting money in that way, and this one was a huge surprise to me. Now, if it had happened next offseason and we were able to, swing a trade and the dead cap was only $12 million, that's more where I expected this to happen. Like I said, there's who knows what's going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. And it may have just been time for a change of scenery. Now, the one thing that seeing a ton of, immediate reaction to this that's getting overlooked. I keep seeing a picture shared on social media of Josh Allen's top 3 targets next year, and it's got Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, and Mac Hollins in it. And I think it's a gross oversight to not include Kincaid in that picture. It's one thing if you said, look at Josh Allen's receiving core right now, or his wide receivers, but it even says the top 3 targets. Kincaid really blossomed towards the tail end of last year. First round pick, getting into another year in the system, another year with Josh Allen, and I think we're so used to, high-flying wide receivers and, the 11 personnel that it's, I don't know, easy to forget how good Kincaid was in his rookie year. But I mean, that as it stands right now, that's your number 1 target going into next year. So just put that picture aside. The other thing is prolific as Diggs has been over his tenure in Buffalo. When we look at kind of the tail end of last season, they're not really super hard numbers to replace, and we still had a very successful offense with Diggs being a shortcoming. And it wasn't just, low yardage games. It was super inefficient games. I'm just going to run through. This is from week 10 on last year. 3 catches on 5 attempts for 34 yards, 4 of 8 for 27, 6 of 11 for 74 yards, 4 for 11 for 24, 4 of 5 for 48, 5 of 8 for 29, 4 of 7 for 26, 7 of 8 for 87, 7 of 9 for 52, and 3 of 8 for 21. I mean, are there things that goes into that? Are there other players that are getting more opportunity because, the number 1 cornerback or double teams, whatever, is all shifting to Diggs? Yeah, sure. But we've also seen Diggs be super productive through all those things, through the double coverages, through, safeties rolling on top of him. And kind of the inefficiency numbers when we see, like four of 11 and 6 of 11, those feel to me like times where Josh Allen is kind of trying to force the ball into Diggs. And, was there somebody that could have been more open on the play? Is Josh Allen trying to force that ball in there because he's worried about upsetting Diggs because he's a big personality? I'm not saying that the Bills immediately get better after this move. I'm saying I'm willing to give it time and see how things play out. I think there was a certain aspect of it was great while it lasted and it's kind of run its course. And like I said, this can be a reset button. Now, as far as the mock drafts that I had went, there's a ton of adjusted needs that we're going to have to take another look at. I kind of had the defensive line as a more pressing need. I knew going into it that there'd be a ton of people out there that didn't like that. With Stefon Diggs in the mix, with Kincaid getting another year, with Shakir emerging, adding Curtis Samuel, who I think is a pretty good receiver who's had terrible quarterback play. I still wanted to add receiver, but it was more kind of planning for life after Diggs. A guy that can get a couple of years before, being thrust into a true number one receiver role. And it's kind of looking at the way Bean has historically built the trenches first and then kind of moved outwards. And a really deep receiving class. I was anticipating, an unpopular defensive end or defensive tackle first and then receiver being addressed later. I think that totally changes now. I think moving up in the first round to get your guy is now in play. I think maybe trading back and double dipping and getting two of these guys in the second round, maybe that's in play. Just one move changes the landscape so much of where I expect the Bills to go now and how they do it. I will say I've seen a ton out there about the Bills like getting hosed in this trade. We'll leave the late round picks out of it, but the Bills receive a 2025 second round pick for Diggs, and it's Minnesota's second round pick. I think it's actually pretty decent return for an aging player that, yes, still has juice in the tank, but also like if they're willing to move on now, tells me that they were probably moving on next year anyways. And a second round pick for a Minnesota team, and we'll see what they end up doing at the quarterback position through the draft. But as it stands right now, planning on starting Sam Darnold, I don't imagine that they're going to be a very good football team, and that's essentially, a late first round pick. If things play out kind of how I think it's going to be. Minnesota seems to be a team that's rebuilding. Maybe they draft a young quarterback early. Who knows what happens with Minnesota, but I don't think it's going to be a situation where Minnesota's, sniffing at the Super Bowl and you're getting, basically a third round pick for Diggs. I think this is going to be a pretty early second round pick. And maybe being able to use that pick to, parlay some moves up the board here, maybe convert it into some draft capital this year. I think that'd be my only complaint on the return is that it's a 2025 pick. I think with the talent at the receiver position this year, I don't anticipate them holding on to that for next year. I think we see that used to maybe move up in the first, maybe get themselves a couple picks in the third round this year. We'll see how it shakes out, but overall, it's kind of been a roller coaster day for me here. Just kind of sorting through, starting at what the hell is going on. Didn't think there was any possible way to this happening to, okay, well, let's look at what the long-term plan here is. And I think there's a few things to consider. I mean, first and foremost, I think Brandon Beane's been overall a very good GM for the Bills. And I don't think that he's a fan of taking on dead cap, and I don't think that he would have made this move lightly, and I don't think he would have made this move without the next plan in place. I think also something that's going to get lost in the shuffle here, when you have a franchise quarterback like Josh Allen, you're not making a move like this without him being consulted and him giving the okay on it. So like I said, maybe the organization kind of kept it a little bit more buttoned up last year throughout the season, but maybe that relationship wasn't quite where we thought it was, looking at the offseason. And I think this is also a situation where when we talk about resetting the money, you can double dip at receiver in this draft. You can have, Curtis Samuel, Shakir, Kincaid. You can lump all those guys together, and you're talking, 4, 5, 6 players whose cap hit is going to be less cumulatively than Diggs was in 1 year. And I have some friends texting me, the initial reaction of, oh, this means we're trading for T. Higgins, or, oh, here comes Brandon Ayuk. I would get myself excited for that, and I think those are great players that could immediately help this team. But I don't think that's the premise of Beane making this move. I think this is following an offseason of making tough decisions to get a younger, cheaper roster. And we've seen Brandon Beane double dip several times in drafts, and I think you see that this year. And I don't think he waits till like the 5th round to take the second receiver. I think you see 2 meaningful investments at receiver early in the draft this year, and you kind of take that young, cheap talent. You hope that it produces right away, and you're able to spend the money elsewhere. You're able to have a few year little, buffer here coming up where you're kind of reset to, I don't want to say that where the cap was when they came in, but being able to have cap flexibility again and not going into every offseason of, do we have to restructure Diggs and Allen to even get cap compliant? I think we saw this year Beane save a couple levers that could have created more cap space. And I think that's kind of with an eye towards the future. And I don't think that's to say that, a move like this means that the Bills aren't competing next year. I think this is the time where you kind of bet on your elite quarterback being able to elevate some people, bring some people along quicker, make a guy like Curtis Samuel, be the receiver that a lot of people think that he can be. Continue developing with Shakir, Kincaid, add some pieces, and just able to reset the room with cheap talent and be able to get back to, kind of reset the clock on the salary cap, where we've just kind of been pushing everything down the road, and this core is close. We're going to get over the hump, push it down the road another year, versus now just being able to have that reset button while still being competitive. And for people out there saying, they don't think the Bills are going to make the playoffs this year, just kind of looking at the landscape of the AFC East, the Dolphins are having salary cap trouble, and they haven't even extended. They haven't even given a contract to Tua yet. They had to let big name players walk already. Tyreek Hill's expensive. Jalen Waddle's coming up for a contract. Then you look at the Patriots. They're probably going to draft a quarterback this year, but the way things have been moving there, still not concerned with them as an immediate threat. Maybe they start building towards a semblance of competitive again. And then the Jets. The Jets looking like they're pushing it all in again. We kind of saw how that went last year for them. Granted, Aaron Rodgers gets hurt week 1. But I mean, they're kind of pushing all their eggs into the basket of doing it again this year, with a 40-something-year-old quarterback coming off a serious injury, another year older, behind a line that hasn't been good. I can see a world where the Jets are competitive this year. I also think they're closer to firing their head coach and their GM than they are to winning a Super Bowl. Just that comboed with, how much the Bills how much success they've had inside the division, how much talent we still have on defense. Despite losing your number one receiver, you still have wherever you want to rank him, a top 3 quarterback in the league. You have a first-round pick receiving option from last year. You have James Cook that emerged last year. I just don't think this puts us back as far as people's initial response is seeming to be for me. I think we also have to account for, the post-June 1st designation for Trey White's release. You're going to get another $10 million in cap space there. There's still a lot of time and a lot of creativity Bean can have constructing this roster. I think it all starts with the draft. So certainly, about 3 hours ago, I was at, holy shit, the sky is falling. Diggs got traded. But kind of letting a few hours sink in, kind of think through the X's and O's of it. Certainly makes the draft more interesting, and we'll see what happens there. But yeah, that's it for this week. I'm going to try to do the mock drafts again next week with a, fully different perspective on what I think this draft is going to look like. Certainly wild, weird news to kind of start my day with today. Like I said, I think Bean's been a very successful GM in Buffalo. I don't think this is a move that he would make lightly. I don't think it's a move that he would make without the next 3 steps in place. So we'll see what happens there. Make sure you're subscribed so you're not missing any episodes like this when some wild breaking news happens. Going to try to do the mock drafts again for next week, see how things shake out. But thank you again for tuning in. Chin up, we still got Josh Allen, and we'll talk to you next week. Go Bills.